You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 287. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you? I am so glad you're here today because I have a topic that I think you're going to love. I really do. I've been sharing it and working through this concept with a lot of my clients recently, and I cannot wait to share it with you as well. So let's start by thinking about our relationship with time, shall we? How often does it seem like you're in a constant state of tug of war when it comes to your relationship with time? No matter how hard you try, your schedule never seems to quite work out for you. You're always pulling for more, wanting more time. And it's like you're always in this battle. You've followed the advice, you've set the timers, you've used the color coding things, you've tried the different planners, but it still seems like time manages to slip through your fingers. Honestly, I think that this kind of describes the general experience of most ADHD brains that I talk with when it comes to our relationship with time. So if it sounds relatable, hello, welcome, you're in good company. But just because it's familiar doesn't necessarily mean it's a really fun experience, right? It doesn't mean it's a super fun pastime. And today, what I'd love to do is offer a new perspective on how we think about time generally, how we make use of our time specifically, and the role that our energy plays in both. So we are going to really kind of shake up our approach to scheduling our time and what it means to quote unquote make the most of our time. Because spoiler alert, it is not about controlling every minute the most efficiently as possible or trying to cram even more into your already packed schedule. Nope, that's not it. That's not the answer. What we're going to do today is explore how you can tune into your natural energy rhythms, what makes you tick, and use that understanding to help you create greater flow across your days and your weeks. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention, with time in mind, that we are at the end of January. And that means the January cohort of We're Busy Being Awesome, my small group coaching program, is about to begin. Now, I am recording this episode early, so I don't actually know if the group is full or not. But if you've been waiting for the last minute to join, this is it. This is the last minute. So you can pop over to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/group. If there is a spot to join us, I would love to have you join us. I cap the group at 15 just to make sure that it stays small and you get all that support that you need. So if you are interested in joining us, if you're ready to make things happen by working with your brain, make sure you head over to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/group. Things are starting up this week. All right, let's dive in. Let's start by talking through some, what I think are important truths that are just so important for you to know. Okay. And I'm going to offer that in advance, your brain may fight against what I'm about to say. That's okay. Stick with me. So if you find that you've been struggling with your schedule or managing yourself within time, if you're struggling with your use of time, here's what's true. It is not because you're lazy. It is not because you're incapable. It is definitely not because you're just not trying hard enough or that you just don't care enough. Okay? Even though this is what most of us have been told at different times in our lives, even though this is what we've probably adopted through societal programming, it's not true. That is not the reason why time feels challenging. Okay? The truth is, most of the traditional time management advice and methods out there just were not created with the ADHD brain in mind. We have time blindness, okay? We have no idea how much time things actually take, especially if they are new to us or we haven't done them for a while or there's a new twist. And our ability to accurately plan something and accurately create a schedule with things we've never done before, that is just a big ask because it is highly dependent on knowing our capacity and knowing what we can complete in a day. when we deal with time blindness and we're trying to schedule things we've never done, this becomes very challenging. I remember when I went through my coaching certification several years ago, we were taught this very rigid time management approach, super, super rigid. And one of the guiding principles of that process was, if you say you're going to get it done in an hour, it's done in an hour, move on. If you say it'll take 2 hours, get it done in 2 hours, move on, no exceptions. Needless to say, this made my brain want to melt because, again, we're time blind. So that approach doesn't work. We need the space. We need some flexibility to work with that, okay? So again, this problem, this time management problem, is not you. The problem is that these strategies are not built with flexibility. They are not built for an ADHD brain. Nobody's taught us how to work with our brains and our natural energy patterns and our levels of capacity. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to actually do that. In fact, we're going to do it over the next 2 episodes. My goal for this episode, when you're done listening, you will walk away with a very clear idea of your primary energy style and how to work with it. And like I said, I am so excited about this topic because it is one that I've been sharing a lot with my clients. It's been really landing. And the concept is your energy style of either a workhorse or a thoroughbred. Okay, so by the end of this episode, you are going to know, first of all, what that even means and how to identify which of the approaches is most relevant for you. You may also be a mixture of both. Probably there's a little bit of both in there, depending on what you're doing, the season, the type of activity. But most importantly, you're going to see how this knowledge of your energy type, whether you're more of a workhorse or more of a thoroughbred, can absolutely transform the way you approach time. And then next week, we're going to take what you discover and put it into practice in your life. Okay, so make sure that you've hit the little subscribe button on YouTube or the follow button on your podcast player. And while you're there, by the way, if you are enjoying this podcast, would you be a rock star and leave some stars, preferably 5? Maybe even share a sentence about, why someone who has ADHD would want to listen to this podcast. When you do this, you help get the podcast to even more busy, awesome brains who need these resources, because it's cueing to the algorithm that the podcast is useful, that people are listening. And I so appreciate your help. So thank you for popping over, for following, for subscribing, for leaving those 5 stars. If you're not enjoying the podcast, you don't have to leave any stars. You can just leave that part out. Okay, I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Let's talk about the workhorse versus the thoroughbred framework, shall we? We're going to start by talking about energy flow, because understanding your natural rhythms is key to really reshaping how we approach our time. Now, some of us tend to thrive more on that steady, consistent, persistent routine. So we tend to find our groove by showing up regularly, making that incremental progress over time. Okay, so that's one side. Now, others of us work best with powerful bursts of focused energy, followed by some longer intentional periods of recovery. Now, I want to mention that both of these are equal in weight. Okay, there's not one that's better than the other. The important thing is learning to recognize which approach aligns with how you naturally operate. Okay, so I like to think of this as the difference between a workhorse and a thoroughbred, like I mentioned earlier. And the workhorses tend to have that steady, persistent energy. They show up each day, they make that small, measurable progress, one day after another. Now, this type tends to thrive on routines, on that habit stacking, on the gradual steps forward. Okay, so a workhorse might dedicate an hour or something each morning to a specific task, whether it's journaling or writing emails or working on some home project or what have you. And that persistent rhythm builds the momentum and it helps them to stay on track. So that's the workhorse side of things. On the other side of things, we have our thoroughbreds, okay? Thoroughbreds tend to thrive on those short bursts of intense focus. They can accomplish a whole lot in a relatively short amount of time, but then they also need a lot of downtime on the other side to recharge. Because without that recharge time, burnout sets in pretty darn quick. So for a thoroughbred, a productive week might look like 2 high energy sprint days, and they're diving into some big project, but then it's followed by a couple of lighter days where they're organizing files or responding to emails or reading or catching up on things. You know, the lighter tasks, the procrastinate work activities that do need to get done, but they don't require quite as much intense focus. Now, what's interesting and important is that you don't necessarily fall into one category or the other. You're not totally a workhorse or completely a thoroughbred. There may be some who are very much one or the other, but it's not necessary for that to be the case. Chances are you find yourself naturally aligning with one energy style in most situations, but then there's a couple of others where you more align with the opposite energy style. So for instance, maybe you are more of a workhorse when it comes to regular routines, things like exercising or doing the dishes or something like that. Okay. But then you're more of a thoroughbred when it comes to taking on creative projects or working under tight deadlines for different goals and things at work. What's important here is to start observing your own rhythms and recognizing when one style seems to be more supportive for you over another. For those of us with ADHD brains, it's probably worth noting that many of us tend toward the thoroughbred energy, especially when it comes to projects and goals, anything that requires a lot of activation energy. Okay, we can dive into something with that incredible focus and intensity, but then on the other side, that recovery time is just as crucial as the sprint itself, and we tend to forget about that part. We treat ourselves as workhorses, but we're using the thoroughbred energy all the time. Okay? If we don't have that downtime built in, that is what leads us to the familiar cycle of hyperfocus, burnout, and just constant frustration. So the good news is that by naming and acknowledging these different patterns and the areas of our life that are more thoroughbred and the areas of our life that might be more workhorse, we can start to work with these patterns rather than working against them. Now, with that in mind, I'm also going to just briefly mention a quick nod to those of us with a 28-ish day hormonal cycle as well, because this can also play a significant role in how your energy flows. So you might notice that during certain phases of your cycle, you may be more in that greater burst of energy and you're able to do a lot more versus other parts of your cycle where you need greater rest and recovery. Now, I'm not going to go into depth further in this episode on that topic, but I do want to just mention it here because it's another component in why we want to tune into our own rhythms as often as possible and to start to get to know them and what works best for us. Because when we can recognize these natural ebbs and flows and the way that our energy levels work, you can plan your time in a much more supportive way rather than constantly fighting against your body's natural patterns. So when we think about the thoroughbred and the workhorse framework, it gives us permission to really honor our natural rhythms instead of forcing ourselves into this model that doesn't fit. So again, whether you resonate more with the steady progress of the workhorse, doing a little bit every day, or the dynamic sprints of the thoroughbred, or you're a mixture of both, knowing your energy type is key. By understanding these rhythms, you're already taking that first important step in helping yourself Stop fighting against time and instead designing a day that actually works for you. So, how do we identify your energy type? You may already have kind of a general guess, but let's talk about how you can know. Okay, when it comes to identifying your energy style, I think the most important thing to remember is that there's no right or wrong way to operate. Again, as I've mentioned before, the key is understanding how you work best, because that's what allows you to lean into your rhythms and stop fighting against them. So let's take a moment to reflect on your patterns and your preferences. And we're going to do this with a couple of different reflection questions, because you all know I love a good question. So I encourage you to start by asking yourself, do I feel more productive when I have that steady, predictable routine? Or do I find my best work when it comes in those short, intense bursts of focus? If you find that you tend to thrive on that persistence, on tackling a relatively manageable amount of work on most days, you probably lean more toward the workhorse style. Now, if you tend to dive deep into a particular task or project for hours or days, and then you need a longer break on the other side to recover, you're probably more of a thoroughbred. Another question to help refine your answer is to think about how you handle your low energy days. So you might ask yourself, do I have regular daily tasks that are pretty sustainable and then I just have a regular recovery at the end of each day? Or do I tend to pause for longer recoveries during longer stretches of the day, right? So workhorses might stick to that kind of slow, persistent approach where they put in a little bit each day, but they also get the rest at the end of each day. They're pushing at a regular, persistent interval that also allows for rest shortly after in the same day. On the other hand, we have our thoroughbreds who often need that complete downtime, that total recharge after a big sprint. Okay, so that's the second area to explore. How do I tend to recharge? What does that look like? And then finally, let's think about exhaustion. You might ask yourself, what does it feel like when I reach that point of depletion? And when does it happen? Does it come from a steady work day after day without any kind of pause? Like I just keep doing the things, but then I keep doing the things all through the weekend and everything? Or is it from sprinting way too hard for too many days in a row and then not giving yourself the recovery time you actually need? If your answer is that you tend to feel more drained by that ongoing grind of the small tasks, you keep showing up, but you're feeling drained because you're not having any type of break, you may be pushing your workhorse tendencies too far. You keep showing up, you keep doing the things, but maybe you're skipping the weekend when you do have a little bit of a longer recharge. You keep showing up and working at that time too, and you've just pushed what is a strength of yours where you can show up persistently. You're pushing it too far and you're not getting your rest. On the other hand, if exhaustion tends to sneak up more often after that all-out sprint, okay, as a thoroughbred, you might need to build in that longer rest and recovery that a thoroughbred needs. So as you think about these different questions around your energy and your rest and when you feel depleted, when you're thinking about these questions, you may notice your energy isn't black and white. It's not about being one or the other. Some of you might be, but it doesn't have to be, okay? The important thing here is recognizing how your energy shifts in different contexts. Let me give you some examples here of where you might see a workhorse in one situation and a thoroughbred in another situation, but it's the same person, okay? So for instance, maybe you are a workhorse when it comes to a habit or a routine that you've established, but then when it comes to your creative projects, you're all thoroughbred. You thrive in that burst of focused energy, and you actually need quite a bit of time to recover before you dive into the next thing. Or maybe it's the opposite, and you tend to approach socializing like a thoroughbred, and you dive all in and you're around a lot of people, but then you also need long periods of recovery after those high energy events. But on the other hand, handling the work tasks are more like a workhorse. You just persistently chip away at the to-do list each day. Both of these styles can coexist. It's totally common to switch between them. Again, the important thing is knowing how it shows up for you. Neither approach is better or worse. They're just different. What I love about this framework is that it gives you the permission to embrace your natural rhythm. Because once you understand how you work best, it's so much easier to stop comparing yourself to others and shoulding on yourself about how you should be showing up, and instead start designing your days in a way that actually supports you. This awareness is the first step toward transforming how you experience your time. As you pay attention to your rhythms, to your energy patterns, you're going to start seeing where you might make some adjustments so that you can start aligning your schedule to what works for you, whether you are a workhorse or a thoroughbred or a mix of both. And you're able to start learning how you can honor your energy. And I'm telling you, this is such a powerful tool when it comes to creating greater flow and ease in your life. Because once you name those patterns, you're going to see how much easier it is to start making those intentional decisions about your time without trying to force yourself into a mold that just doesn't fit. So here's what I really want you to remember. Effective time management is not about rigid schedules or squeezing productivity out of every minute and making everything as efficient as possible. What it's all about is tuning into your natural energy rhythms, whether you lean toward the workhorse style or the thoroughbred style, or a mix of both. It's about identifying your energy styles and then creating a flow in your day that feels supportive and sustainable. So as you go through your week, I invite you to reflect on those questions that we talked about to help you start seeing these patterns and naming them in yourself. How does your energy show up? Are you more often in the workhorse space or the thoroughbred space of energy? Do you notice one energy come up more often in work situations and another in social situations? Or do you find you're a mix depending on the particular season you're in? Start noticing those patterns, okay? This week is all about building that awareness. And then next week, we'll take those insights that you discover and we will explore how you can apply them to your life. And I'll be sharing strategies for setting goals and managing projects and designing that structure that works best for your energy. So again, make sure you hit the little subscribe button or the follow button on your podcast player so you don't miss it. I will see you all back here next week. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these strategies that we talk about on the podcast deeper, if you are ready to apply these concepts to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes where you can learn more about both my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome, as well as one-on-one private coaching. Also, if you want to learn my simple step-by-step approach to locking in a routine and making it stick, be sure to check out my free course called the ADHD Routine Revamp. You can tap through the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/routine to sign up. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.